And then that's the crux of the issue, because under that survey, then we would know if there's been a discriminatory practice to our service cuts, correct?
Or not, correct?
Or not. But if there are, it would mean what?
The FTA letter that we received this week said we would either have to mitigate, which means we'd have to do some kind of new service to solve the...
You'd have to monitor.
We'd have to mitigate the disparate impacts or roll back the service changes.
What does mitigate mean, so I understand?
Well, if we cut a particular route, rather than putting back the exact same service that we cut, we could put in something else new that was different than what was originally there.
All right. So financially, how are we preparing to deal with that?
First of all, I don't think that's the likely outcome. I think I do think.
Wait, I understand it. That's not a real good answer so far, because...
Well, I was in mid-sentence.
Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
The proposed budget that we have does not assume the restoration of the service. We do have a budget proposal to consider, which is in the plaque, which is a balanced budget, which addresses deferred maintenance and other things. In the event that we were to restore significant amounts of service, it would change that situation significantly, going to the red.
But I think that, again, we're going through an exercise in a process, all right? First of all, we have been told that in all of these service cuts, there is no challenge and no civil rights discrimination. Somehow, the FTA doesn't see it your way or our way. So consequently, they've written us a letter and said, you need to do a reevaluation of that, and you need to look at it. I'm reading, and I understand there's negotiations on methodology. I told you I was very concerned about the limited English proficiency stuff, because that's, 1974 as far as I'm concerned. But the issue of this one is, I'm not sure that we're understanding the implications for it. All right, because our budget, Diane, is based on a certain number. That number for any potential change is not in the budget. And I don't think, because then, if it's not, we should, what makes you think so far that there is, under this methodology, as I look at it, that there is not going to be, most of the lines that were cut were in minority areas.
The FTA's fundamental concern is the inadequacy of the evaluation of impact. Having said that, we've done a great deal of work about the nature of the communities in which we operate, the nature of our ridership. We will assemble that data in conformance with the FTA's requirements. Los Angeles is, generally speaking, a very diverse county. I think one of probably the most diverse in the country. So it is true that every line operates in minority neighborhoods, almost every line at least. Even lines that operate through major areas which are not fundamentally minority. So we have to go through and do this analysis, and then we'll know whether or not we have a problem.
Believe me, I appreciate that, and I know that. But it's like anything else with a plan. It's like, let's not set aside any money for liability, because we don't know what our liability is. We all know that we will have liability, so consequently, you set aside money for it, you hope it's going to be enough and not over that amount. But I'm just saying, right now, as we're looking, that's why I'm looking at the time frame as to what we're doing. And it's not enough to say, because I know during the service cuts, those assurances were given to us, and then when we see this letter from the FTA, and it's a pretty strong letter, it's troublesome. And now we're going through a very elaborate process of methodology and review, and 20% of the 25%, whether it's going to be 24 months or whether it's going to be 36 months. These are all technical issues that are going to produce an outcome. That's why I'm trying to wonder if, in fact, they produce an outcome 60 days later with a set of recommendations 30 or 45 days later, and if it requires that it implements a new line, where would the money come from?
In the event that there be such a finding, we would then negotiate with the FTA as to what that mitigation or restoration would be, and under what kind of a time frame would that occur. At that point, we can come back to the board and discuss with the board what the financial impacts of that result would be on for the budget.
You know, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it's almost like there's a lot of moving parts. Same answer.
Oh, I don't think, you're not gonna receive, let's assume that we had an absolute worst case here, absolute worst case for sake of discussion. There are logistical requirements to add 400,000 hours of service. That's not gonna happen in 30 days, it's physically impossible. Therefore, we would have the requirement of sitting with the FTA and figuring out, okay, given this situation, what do we do about it? What is our plan?
Well, I appreciate that. I know you have to plan for it, but if you set aside no money in the budget, it's like anything else, got to come out of somewhere else. Or you can go to the FTA and say, I don't have any money to do it.
And we will be having the discussion with the FTA as to what the conclusion of the analysis would be and what the impacts would be. That's part of the process that we're undertaking.
If you were to total the service cuts for the last 36 months, what would the number be?
I'm sorry, I think that's around, someone said 400,000, somewhere in that neighborhood.
400,000
Hours.
hours,
Right.
which would mean how many hours, how many dollars?
Generally speaking, you can assume for sake of this level of discussion, $100, $120 an hour, something like that.
Is that correct? So, should we not, I mean, it just seems like it's not a very
Well,
generous.
we would have, well, I disagree. We could go back and find, money and put it in the bank against that eventuality, and we could defer all of the actions for which that money is currently proposed to be dedicated to in the budget. I don't recommend that at this time.
Well, I know you don't recommend that, and I can appreciate that, but I don't even see that in the equation so far. It hasn't been discussed, and what we're doing, and that's why I wanted to understand the time frame, is that we're not dealing with the eventuality. We may have to, again, there might be mitigation will still cost you something. So, I mean, are you assuming that we're going to get, or the response is going to be that there is nothing here? So consequently, we don't need to set aside the money.
No, what I'm assuming is that in the event that the FTA comes to this conclusion, we would then speak with them and negotiate what the remedy would be. We would then put together a plan to implement that remedy. But we're not to that phase yet.
Well, but that's why I asked about the timing. That's why I asked about the survey and the recommendations and when the FTA might rule. Let's say they rule that you have to replace some of these lines in our 2012-2013 budget. Where would the money come from if you're not
We would
budgeting?
defer other or shrink other areas of activity in the budget.
Thank you.
We have public comment, John Walsh.